PoliticsJOE.
Hiya, Seán. Welcome to Belfast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back. To kick off, we just have a chat. We're talking now a couple of days before Keir Starmer resigns and Andy Burnham takes his place. What do you see that as a sign of? Are you good pals with either of them, or do you have a thought of what the signs for the UK as a whole are?
Well, you have to start off by wishing whoever's in the job, wishing them well, because so many decisions that they take have a very, very direct impact on the lives of people here on this island, and particularly in the north. Andy Burnham's a unionist. So is Keir Starmer. So is every British Prime Minister. And part of their dispensation is to keep the union. So we need to be very, very mindful that when Mr. Burnham comes in, that he understands that the Good Friday Agreement has changed the way a British government should act. It's no longer the sole responsibility. Now, as an Irish person, I would say the British government has never had any right in Ireland and never will have any right in Ireland. But for decades and for all of my life, they did whatever they wanted, and they told everybody else to butt out, and this was an internal matter for the government of the United Kingdom. Now, the Good Friday Agreement has set out rules and regulations and codes that the British government are obliged to abide by, and not least that the people of the island, like one of the big achievements of the Good Friday Agreement, there are probably 3 or 4 main pillars to it. Measures to bring in equality, to end discrimination, dealing with policing, legacy issues, and so on. The governance of the place, but also that the British government and the Irish government would hold referendums, and the people will decide the future. So there's the union is now very conditional. But is it a voluntary union? No, I would argue it isn't a voluntary union. But if it is, well then Mr. Burnham should be bending his will to creating the conditions with the Irish government for people here to decide what way we want to govern ourselves.
Could you imagine the 7th Prime Minister in 6 years deciding that now is a good time to call a border poll?
Well, he's going to have to.
Why?
Because that increasingly, and it doesn't impinge very much on British consciousness at this time, but increasingly the issue of Irish unity is now centre stage. It's now part of the daily parlance, part of the daily political debate. And remember, in the so-called United Kingdom, we have a First Minister in Scotland who is committed to independence for Scotland. The same in Wales, and the same here in the north. So we have 3 First Ministers in these 3 devolved administrations who are committed to self-determination for their own particular place, and that will continue. I imagine in Ireland anyway, whatever about what's happening in Scotland or Wales, in Ireland that's going to continue, and it's going to continue to grow.
The big brother of that union, the English side of it, if opinion polls are to be believed, someone like Nigel Farage is going to be the next Prime Minister. Is that a good sign for the union? Is it a good sign for the future of politics on these islands?
Well, it's not a good sign for ordinary working class people on either of the islands. But look, Burnham isn't even in, so let's not jump ahead to the next election. Andrew Burnham has been handed on a plate, peace. Right? It's 30 years since the IRA ceased to be, took itself off the stage. It's still amazing to me that for the 3 or 4 or 5 main combatant forces that were here, and that includes the British forces, and they had a direct influence and indeed a leadership role with some of the other Unionist armed forces. But it's still a matter of some consideration that the only one you hear about is the IRA. And everybody knows the IRA aren't about. The IRA is finished. It did all the things, everything that it said it would do, it has done. The Unionist paramilitaries have not. The British forces have not. The British government, and one of the reprehensible things that Keir Starmer is responsible for is the legacy issue. And he and the Irish government have signed up for an arrangement which is aimed at getting the British forces off the hook, at covering up the level or extent or depth of collusion and all that goes with it. So Andy Burnham's coming in with the possibility of building on what he has been presented with. And maybe it matters to him that the Good Friday Agreement came from a Labour Prime Minister. Maybe that's something that the Labour Party can take some comfort from and some pride in, because Labour's governance here has been despicable. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. There are good ministers, good representatives, but, you know, where did the His blocks come from? Where did Armagh women being strip searched came from? That came from British Labour administration. So the success of British governments of whatever particular colour have a dreadful record in relation to Ireland. And he has the possibility now on a clean sheet to move everything on. And the way to move it on is to accept that the people have the right to decide the future.
You referenced the Veterans Bill there just briefly. Do you think that the reforms that the Labour government are doing to what the Conservatives proposed is going to be substantial in any way, shape, or form?
No, I think the equation for them is very straightforward. I mean, leaving aside the strength of the veterans' lobby and their support among the right wing and among the Tories and I suppose some of the other state agencies, leaving all of that aside for a moment, for them not to put the victims first, right? So, and I don't want this interview to be about talking about the past all the time, but remember, we had Bloody Sunday. We were told that they were all armed. All the people that were killed, they were armed, they were gunmen. We were told that for decades. Everybody that was there knew that wasn't the case. There was a number of other inquiries which were just whitewash affairs. It took all those years to get to the bottom of it. Same in Ballymurphy, same in Spring Hill, same with different other incidents where the British Army were doing exactly what the British Army was supposed to do. So it wasn't just the paras, it wasn't reckless firing, it was what they did in Aden a few years before this, it's what they did in Palestine, it's what they did in other parts of the world. It was about suppression of the people who were seen as being subversive or in resistance to them. So a British government, and this is the point I lost a moment ago, is still sending soldiers into other theatres. And how can I expect them to do what it's sending them in to do if it's going to hang them out? You know, it's not that long that we had the Mau Mau veterans having fought a 50-year campaign. Had been acknowledged that they were tortured, that they were brutalised by British soldiers. So the big mistake that I see happening in my lifetime is when the demands were made reasonably and peacefully for civil rights. And they were very modest rights. They were, the right to vote, the right not to be interned without trial, or to be detained, or for this to be declared an illegal meeting by an RUC officer. Very, very modest rights. If the British government had have proactively stood up to the Unionists and introduced those rights, because part of the notion behind what the civil rights struggle was about was if we're part of Britain, then give us the same rights as people in Britain have, because people in Britain weren't being governed the way, as a police state, as an apartheid state, the way we were being governed. So they didn't do that. They brought in the army, and they disgracefully handed over their political responsibilities to generals. And generals did what generals do. And the empire was built on such methods. And that's what we put up with for 30, almost 40 years, for 50 years.
Mm. So you were speaking there about how the IRA is often used and very rarely the loyalist paramilitaries are never mentioned. Very, very recently in this city, it's alleged that loyalist paramilitaries were encouraging people to go out and start pogroms, to check the colour and race of people driving through motorways. Only last week we had the 12th of July where on one bonfire there was a mosque. Talking earlier on about the kind of rise of the far right on Britain, do you see kind of how, just tell me what the relationship that you see between loyalism and unionism and kind of the growth of the far right is?
Well, sectarianism is the first cousin of racism. And that's if you are reared, or if you have a political ideology which sees people who are Catholics as being inferior or not worthy of being treated properly, then it's very, very easy to be engaged in actions and so on. And that then translates over to people of a different skin color, or people from another place. So I've mixed feelings about the Orange, and particularly about the 12th of July. I mean, the Orange is a sectarian organization. But for most of its parades, they are family affairs. And particularly in rural Ireland, people gather, and I know lots of Orange men, and they will tell you honestly that they like marching bands, and I like marching bands. At least I like bagpipe bands. They tell you that they like parading, and that they like the music. So you can put up with all of that, and you can tolerate all of that. But where the sectarianism comes to the surface is around these bonfires and the utterances of the leaders. And it's very easy if people were burned out of their homes because they were Catholics, that people were burned out of their homes because they were of a different skin color, or that they're not from this place. So I think that the law has to be enforced. I don't think the PSNI handled those recent race riots well. The social media messages went out asking people to mobilize, and the police then encouraged people to leave work The buses were stopped. This town was like a ghost town. But the whole place was shut down just by somebody sending out social media messaging. So that wasn't handled well. And then the worst, or maybe not the worst, because remember last year we had the race riots in Ballymena. But the one aspect of this was that in the old park, or at least up that part of the Crumlin Road, where a number of people were burned out of their homes, a mob of 80 did that. And the PSNI made no effort to interfere, to stop, to prevent, to take preventative action. So the PSNI have a responsibility. The same thing goes for these bonfires. Most of the bonfires are illegal. Most of the bonfires are made up of material, particularly the pallets, which are stolen. Most of the bonfires are in places where they don't have permission, either in public land or in private parts. And that should be sorted. I mean, if culture amounts to bonfires, and obviously we would like to think that culture is much deeper than that, but then why not regulate it? Why not do it properly? Why not do it safely? A guy fell to his death from the top of a bonfire on the 12th. The same thing happened, if I remember rightly, last year. A number of houses were put in fire accidentally with embers coming from a bonfire. Leave aside all the issues of pollution and so on. Libraries, houses, homes, and those type of buildings which are in close proximity to bonfires, they end up spending hundreds of thousands of pounds boarding up. There was an ongoing issue here in the town of a bonfire being on a place that asbestos was dumped, and it was between two of the main hospitals in the city. So all of this is nuts. Like it's just beyond any sense. So that's why I say I have sort of mixed feelings. Let the Orange Men march as long as they don't go to places that are not wanted, and let them have a good day out and let them enjoy themselves and so on. But that's cop on, and it's well past the time that unionist leaders took the initiative to try and sort this out. It would be the only people at the end of it who suffer the most are the people in the host communities. They're the people who have to put up with it, the people who live in the actual places where the bonfires are built.
To hate marches and pogroms and that kind of thing, do you think in the South in particular, there's a problem with the rise of the far right, and it kind of stems slightly from working class republicanism as well? I mean, you look at some of the by-elections that have been going on in the South recently, how transfers have transferred right rather than within the left. Do you think that republicanism has a problem with the rise of the far right as well, and how do you combat that?
Well, I think we all have to have a very assertive opposition to the far right or to the right generally, but against racism. I mean, let's call it for what it is. That's what it is. So it's against that. Now, at a certain intellectual level, it is understandable that if you are poor, if your children don't have a home, if you have sons and daughters living in the box room, if they don't have a job, if they have very little prospects, and then all of a sudden, and we're mostly white. I mean, one of the results of living in an island is that, the first black man that I saw was a British soldier. So, and I'm sure it's the same, like Phil Lynott and different other people were the exceptions that were about the place.
Paul McGrath.
Yeah, Paul McGrath. Yeah. Paul McGrath. So, you reminded me there of when Nelson Mandela came to visit here to Dublin. It was the day that the Irish football team come home. And I was at the Mandela gig, and the place was bunged, like, with all the soccer fans and everybody welcoming home the heroes. And when Mandela came down the steps of the plane, the crowd gathered for the football team in the airport started to shout, "Ooh, Paul McGrath's da. Ooh, Paul McGrath's da." So most people are decent and most people are sound, but if you're on the receiving end of the inequality, if you have been reared in one of the wealthiest states in Europe, right, and you have no real prospect, you're not going to go forward. And if your children are being targeted by drug gangs and all of the other difficulties, then it's easy for others to wind you up. That the reason you have no home, the reason you don't have enough houses, is because these other people are taking them. The reason why you can't have a better quality of life is because these other people are availing of all the benefits. And that is not the case. But we do need robust, transparent, fair migration laws. We need all of that. But as Imelda May's song says, you don't get to be Irish and racist. And anybody that I have spoken to now, I know the dyed-in-the-wool racists, and it's interesting the alliances made between loyalists and some folks in Dublin. They've stood here in this city carrying the tricolour and carrying a Union Jack. It's an unholy alliance. So what we need to do is to be very, 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 very assertive that we're all human beings, that we all have rights, and that our rights need to be upheld, and we should not be attacking anyone on the basis of religion, race, colour, gender, or any other mark that you can measure by.
Can I just jump back quickly to just one further question on unionism? The news about Jeffrey Donaldson a couple of weeks ago. How do you think the DUP handled that? Do you think there was... how do you think they handled it?
Well, the first thing you have to always remember is that the plight of the victims. So it is commendable that the two young women took the case and that they went through, and everybody listened intently and watched intently the outworkings of the court case. So you have to think about them and their immediate clan. And it's probably not appropriate to say too much about that particular episode, because he has been found guilty and the judge will be bringing in whatever sanction and penalties sentence that he brings in. But then came all these revelations about drunkenness, about misconduct, about inappropriate behaviour. And it defies logic that the DUP didn't know that. In fact, a number of senior DUP people have come forward and say they did know it, that they witnessed. So why the party didn't act? I mean, any of us, if our association, our political party, our club, our family had somebody misbehaving in that way, somebody would intervene. And they're saying they didn't know, even though some of their very senior people not only did know, but are saying they knew at the time and they told others. So we'll see what comes off the inquiry. I know there's a lot of controversy about it not being an appropriate way of investigating these matters, but that there are questions to be answered and they should be answered. And then it's made all the worse because this is a party which was, in its time, basically the political wing of a church. So it led out, condemnation of gay people, of Catholics, of lots and lots of other people that they might have disagreed with, but so I do think that there's a lot to be accounted for.
Is there something to be said in general about the imbalance of power in all of this? I mean, like in the Sinn Féin instance, for example, the Maria Cahill case only recently, Mary Lou McDonald had issued an apology for that, despite the court case falling in the end. But it seems to be that there's a power imbalance at play, that the voices of people that are out of power or not having the power in the situation is not particularly listened to.
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, we all have to be accountable, and we have to be accountable to our peers and accountable also under the law. We were talking about orange parades there. I still find it interesting that the BBC and UTV, the two local sort of channels, they have special programs on the orange parades. It's quite interesting. There's no other.
GB News on it now as well.
Yeah, well, that's probably excusable, but there's no other allowance for shell fighting to get proper coverage of Gaelic games on the BBC. But yet, if you, as a casual observer, just turned on the local channel here on the 11th, 12th, or 13th, you have this wall-to-wall coverage. So the unionists ran this place, and not only the glue that held it all together was Orangism, but it was all about big house unionism. It was all about the big landlords and the owners of the whatever industry there was. And remember, when Ireland was partitioned, the most developed part of the island was here. That this is the Brits weren't being silly, holding on to, they didn't want Connacht or Munster. They went to the place where the shipyards, the linen, the tobacco, the rope works, the brickworks, all that. So unionism was through all strands of our society where there was power, and therefore there's still the I suppose the hangover of that is still permeates, is still there.
If we can move on to just your political awakening and your beginnings, how did your family experience, your father's involvement in the IRA, how did that inform your political awakening and your drive to get into politics?
I used to think it didn't. And I used to say, and it's true, there was no overt political, consciousness on my part. As I was growing up, I was very conscious that I was Irish. There was a couple of a Gaelic in the house. Just my mother had a couple of bits and pieces of Irish. We were all reared in Gaelic games and so on. The school I went to is just 2 blocks up from here. I've lived all my life in this particular community. But when I was doing a bit of research for a bit of reading I was doing, and I was looking at my family history, my paternal grandfather who died quite young, but apparently had been involved in the IRB in his time. His sons were, a number of them were imprisoned, including my father. And then on the maternal side, my grandfather Hanaway was a trade union official. His first wife, who was killed in a road accident, was also a trade union official. Their sons and daughters were also active in republicanism. They were all former prisoners. So reflecting back on it, it's no accident that I would end up following that type of course. And it happened just coincidentally. In 1964, I was at a school in Divis Street the Republicans were trying to combat the ban. Sinn Féin was banned. The United Irishman was a newspaper, it was banned. The Special Powers Act was in full force. And they contested elections, and they put the Irish national flag in the window of the election room. And Ian Paisley, who was an up-and-coming demagogue, said if the RUC didn't take it out, he would come up and take it out. So they busted in, took out the flag. The Republicans put it back in again. Peters came out, took it out again, and then there were maybe 3, 4, 5 days of civil unrest. And we were going up and down to school through this. And I had an awakening and the revelation that this was all happening under the Special Powers Act. So I went into the city centre and I bought a copy of the Special Powers Act in the Public Records Office. And it's something which I think probably has stayed with me since, because a lot of times when we're talking about stuff, I would say to whoever I was working with, let's go and try and get the source document here. Where's this? You know, the Government of Ireland Act is we majored on getting rid of that in the Good Friday Agreement negotiations. So that sort of habit was born out of me going, and when I saw the Special Powers Act, I mean, you could be flogged. I used to know a man, the last man who was flogged. He used to walk up and down the road. I was joking earlier on, a police officer could come into this room and declare this an illegal assembly. Any little badge, you know, whether it was a Fáinne or an Easter Lily or a James Connolly badge, gramophone records, newspapers. The first time I was arrested was for selling the Republican newspaper, the United Irishman. So the coercion once was referred to by a former justice minister, I think it was, in South Africa, when he was being criticised for the apartheid laws, and he said he would give them all up for one clause of the Special Powers Act.
When you think of all that, is there a parallel that you can draw from, I mean, what we're talking about there is the beginning or prior to the armed struggle, but is there a parallel to be drawn between the criticism or kind of particularly in the South as well, the turning of the nose towards the armed struggle in the North and the way the media today criticises and condemns the actions of armed struggles in other parts of the world? So essentially, like the parallel between the provisional IRA and someone like Hamas, for example.
Well, I don't know if there are any parallels, except that people living under occupation and people being suppressed by military means do have the right, in my opinion, to resist by armed actions. Now, because you have the right doesn't mean you have to exercise it. You know, it could be the most foolish thing you ever did in your life, even though you might have the right. But it's in the nature of sections of the media, and it's in the nature of the world that, and there are some famous songs that extol and pinpoint and highlight this, that the armed insurgent will be depicted as a terrorist, and the armed occupation force will be depicted in some way as being about peacekeeping, you know, the peacekeepers. So I've just finished a book which is looking at the use of the law by colonial powers, and in our case by Britain, because never, like the Americans didn't say they were going into Vietnam except to defeat the communists. At the base of what's happening in the Middle East is about power, it's about geopolitics, it's about oil, it's about all of that. And in our case, it was for strategic and other reasons that the British government came here. But they didn't say that was the reason. They said because we were barbarians. Right? They came here to civilize the barbarians. And so with all of these other struggles where big powers go in, interfere in other people's affairs. And it's all about power. It's all about greed. It's all about control. And so is the case here. And then that's reflected in how the media, when you never, here we are talking about the IRA, and the IRA is now a matter of history, but the media will still refer to IRA gangs. No, they won't refer to British Army gangs or UDR gangs or.
I mean, in particular, your childhood experience would almost mirror that of a child in Gaza, from what we're understanding of the situation there.
Yeah, well, I lived, as did anybody of my age, through 30 years of occupation. And this community was dreadfully suppressed. And different times I would have friends here from South Africa or friends here from Palestine, and they were shocked at the density, at the sheer naked force, because there were, on this main road through this district, there were big checkpoint Charlies, big forts, big amounts of choppers in the air and soldiers on foot and so on and so forth. Now, nothing since the time of the Great Hunger is as bad as Gaza. I know Balbriggan was burnt in its time, and I know that Cork was burnt in its time, but nothing compares to what's been visited upon the people of Gaza, and now increasingly in the West Bank. It's just, I've been in Gaza once, I've been in the Middle East and 4 or 5 times, and nothing prepares you for the brutality of the oppression. And that brings us back to the point that I was making earlier on about a British government giving the job over to the generals. Well, the international community, with a number of honourable exceptions, have done the same in relation to a number of situations, like the plight of people affected by starvation, the type of people being affected by a lack of proper health care or water or all of that, but also and particularly just the naked aggression of the Zionists in the Middle East. The Michael D. Higgins had a speech there recently in which he challenged the European Union, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he said that they behaved shamefully and didn't uphold international best practice, UN best practice, and so on. And he's right. If the Israeli government can get away with building a separation wall, which is in direct breach of international law, can treat people the way they're being treated, the thousands of children who are imprisoned, the ongoing ill treatment of prisoners, and I'm minded of particularly young people. If they get away with that, because international law isn't being upheld by those who have the responsibility to uphold it, including our government. And if our government, which is now in the presidency of the European Union, lets that moment pass without taking a stand on the Palestinian issue, without taking a stand on the other issues, which are moral issues, on the issue of Irish neutrality. This government in Dublin wants to give away the Irish people's right to neutrality. So Micheál Martin is now in the driving seat for 6 months. So what's he going to do? Is he just going to keep it warm for the next person? Or is he going to uphold the rights of people who look to people like us because of our history, because we're a colonized people, because we've come through it, and because we have a peace process. It isn't just that we were colonized, we beat off the people who occupied us, but then even despite all the difficulties, we built a peace process out of what was happening here in this part of the island. So there's an opportunity here for the Irish government as presidency of the European Union to make a stand, to make a moral stand on these issues.
What needs to happen tomorrow, next week in Ireland to make this island, not just the north, not just the south, this island at our place?
So the government has to plan for the future. It has to deal with issues that obviously need to be dealt with today. The issues of discrimination, of poverty, of injustice that are affecting people. But planning for the future means planning to end the Union. And the Good Friday Agreement is very, very clear about that referendums will be held north and south. Now, I believe that there are Dublin reasons for Irish unity. I believe that there are Cork reasons, Munster reasons, Galway reasons. It isn't all about the north. Obviously, the north is sort of dislocated. But it's why have we got the dysfunctionality in politics for so long in the southern state? Because that was a dragged out working of partition. And those two big conservative parties sort of were in charge for most of that time. That's starting to break up. But the realignment of Irish politics, which will come when the island is united, and it'll affect all the parties, including Sinn Féin, and it will affect people who are currently unionist, who may find a home in Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil or even in Sinn Féin. So there's going to be a realignment of politics arising. It just makes economic sense that you work together. It's on an island so small, to have two separate health services is just nonsense. And both health ministers recognise that, in fairness to them, that there's a lot of cooperation. And there's a lot of cooperation going on across agriculture, across other sectors. And the Brexit stuff is just a nonsense that we would have a situation where people in this part of the island voted against Brexit, but the Brits did whatever they wanted to do anyway. So you have this nonsense going on at the moment. So we need a change of government, but that's up to the people to decide, and that won't happen for a wee while. But the government that's there now is the government that is there now, and we need to persuade them to plan for the future, to start the business of planning, of bringing people together and figuring out with them what sort of Ireland we can develop ourselves for ourselves.
And just finally, you've probably been one of the most significant political figures on these islands in the last 50 years. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I don't mind. The people who like me will continue to like me, and the people who don't like me will continue not to like me, and I won't be about.
So your epitaph is, if you like me, you like me.
There's one that Martin McGuinness used to quote all the time, the epitaph that Percy French has on his tombstone. Remember me is all I ask, and yet, if remembrance prove a task, forget. So no, I'm not greatly hindered or upset or concerned about legacy. I like to think with a lot of other people, and I don't go for this, one of the most significant political figures in the last 50 years. I was only one of many, and we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for all those people who took a stand, and I'm glad that I was one of them.
Gwir mí na maith.
Fáilte róid.